How would you like to make something that could be around for centuries, or maybe even forever? That's what can happen when you do your work in bronze and stone, like Bill Hopen.
To most of us, a rock is just a rock. A piece of wood is just something to burn in the fireplace, and clay is something you make flower pots out of. But Bill Hopen looks at things a little differently. He's a sculptor, and that means he can look into objects, and instead of seeing what they are, he sees what they might become. On a hill overlooking the quiet town of Sutton, West Virginia, Bill puts his imagination to work.
Art is something that I do just on general principles. It's part of me. And I enjoy expressing myself in an image, in a sculptural image.
One of the fun things about being a sculptor is that your work can take almost any shape. It can be any size, and you can make your art out of almost any material.
Just about anything that you can make art out of, I've tried, I think. I use clay for my thinking in 3 dimensions, and wax. But I'll carve wood. I will carve stone. Sometimes instead of building things up like you do with clay, I'll attach pieces of metal together and weld sculptures together. But most of the work that I do and that I'm known for is figurative work. It has to do with the human figure, and that's usually in bronze.
The first step in making a sculpture is to come up with an idea. That's where all art begins. The next step is to start putting those ideas on paper.
Well, this is one of the many preliminary sketches that I did when I was just trying to come up with the concept for the sculpture of Francis. I think in this one I was really trying to figure out how should that bird, which is pretty central to the character, how should it be? And I just drawing birds all over. Right here is the one that I focused on when I did the work. The drawing is a thinking process. It's a developmental process, and that's where you find the image that you try to capture.
Since art is a creative process, there are no real rules that you have to stick with. For instance, even though Bill usually plans his work carefully, this wood carving just kind of happened.
Sometimes a type of carving is direct carving. You don't really have a preconceived notion of what something's going to be, but you just begin attacking the log and see what comes out of it. Now this one was started at the Forest Festival in Elkins, and that's what I did. I just started working on a log until the rhythm of the chisel marks began to suggest an image to me. You can see a face or an animal or whatever shape you have in your mind, and then you just begin reinforcing that. After a while, you have a pretty good idea of what you've got here. This, I think, is sort of like a Christ figure, but it's all involved with nature, like the way I feel the woods and everything are a part of something spiritual. The way the leaves are growing out of his tree, his fingers, and twigs are growing out of his arms. This isn't one that was planned on paper beforehand. It was one that was sort of discovered within the log.
What happens if you make a mistake while you're carving the figure?
You don't make a mistake. If you do slip, take something off that you wanted to, here's a little chip that came out here. It's just a matter of carving everything around it a little bit deeper. But as you get closer and closer to the final form, you take less and less off until you're just taking little chips. So you don't do any of these big smashing chisel marks that can create a crack. So you get slower and slower as you get closer and closer. And I guess there's always Elmer's glue.
Is it harder to work with wood than steel or stone?
No, it's different though. Usually with metal, you'll be starting with nothing and you'll be building your form up. With wood, you begin with the log and it's a process of subtraction. You keep on taking away and leaving what you want. So, like you mentioned before, if you make a mistake, you can't put it back. But it's a process of finding the form within the material rather than creating the form out of the material. Working stone is a little bit harder to carve, but it's essentially the same process of removing chips to find your form.
What kind of tools do you need to do this kind of work?
Well, these are good. These gouges. They're a little curved knife with a razor-sharp edge on the end of it. And when they cut through the wood, they take a neat little shaving off that don't really crack or chip the wood. And they're good for getting in little rounded cuts, which is what you need as a figurative sculptor. After these are, you want to remove these marks. Sometimes you leave them in because they're nice texture. Other places you want to remove them. So after these gouge marks are made here, one will go over with a rasp or sandpaper or scraper to get a smoother look.
What material do you prefer to work with?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. They're all fun in their own way, and there's like a purpose for each one. I would say carving wood is one of my favorites, but I also enjoy bronze. The idea of a bronze lasting for several thousand years, like it will, is very interesting to me. The fact that another artist, it's like a dialogue with another artist 2,000 years from now will look at my sculpture and think about what I was thinking about, what I was feeling about life in this day. All these monuments and things that I have out here will probably, survive for many, many centuries. And wood, I suppose it might if it was taken care of, but wood is susceptible to, if it's not protected, insect damage, it can rot and things like that. It can burn if the building burns around it. So it's less immortal than bronze. I think those are my two favorite mediums.
Bill's work spills all around his home. He does some work in his basement, and some in his office in the house. But for the big projects, he needs more elbow room, so he's built a studio on the hill above his home.
This is the casting studio where Bill's largest works are molded into shape and brought to life.
Most of Bill's work is created by the molding process. It begins with the clay of the artist. It's an oil-based clay that doesn't dry and crack like the water-based stuff most of us have used in art class. That clay is molded into the desired shape. In this case, a small figure of Icarus, the boy who tried to fly. Around that clay figure, Bill pours a kind of liquid rubber. When it dries, you have a mold of the statue, which you can then fill with almost any material, like wax, concrete, and even bronze.
With a mold, you can reproduce over and over.
What's this?
And they're all the same. That's where the wax is poured in. But over here, it's removed. And I'll show you how that's done. The ability to make many of them in wax allows you to make many of them in bronze. Wax is an intermediate step between the mold and the production in metal. Every time you make one in metal, this is a bronze here, the wax is surrounded by a ceramic material, which is baked in an oven. And the wax, it just melts and it drops out. But it leaves a hole exactly the shape of the way that the wax was inside the ceramic material. And that's where we pour hot molten metal. And it'll take up the shape of exactly where the wax was. And then you have something that will last several thousand years instead of being easily broken or melting or whatever.
That same process works for even the biggest statues.
This clay has been softened by heat, so and it makes it very easy to work. As you know, the clay is usually pretty hard. Right under here. Yeah, just like this. Here, you do one right on top of me. I'll put it on like this. And then I'll kind of smear the edges in some stuff. Yeah. And you smear the edges down. Now when that hardens a little bit, you can take a knife. I'll go get a loop. Now this is a lot easier than carving wood, isn't it?
You'll notice that under the clay there's a metal framework. That's because clay is very heavy and it can't support itself. So the artist has to build his work over the metal skeleton.
After the clay is done over the armature in the way that you like it, in the way that you want the finished sculpture to look, we make a rubber mold, like the one, that we're going to pour wax in. But this rubber is applied in a liquid form over the sculpture, and it'll pick up all the little details in the sculpture. You can see the face inside out. This is from the police memorial down in Charleston. But let me see. I'll just put this clay over here and peel it out, and then you can see. There's the eye.
Bill even uses the mold process to practice recycling. He melts down his aluminum cans in this small furnace. It heats the metal to about 2,000 degrees. Then the molten aluminum is poured into mold. When it cools, another sculpture will have taken form without hurting the environment.
Let's just make sure we have plenty of pressure in there. We can always knock it off.
For young artists who would like to be a sculptor someday, Bill has some very basic advice.
Draw, 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 and draw. And learn to look at things. While observe the world and learn about shapes and form. Take some clay and play with clay and make as many shapes as you can with that. Carving, you can carve a piece of plaster, a piece of wood. You might want to get some idea from somebody who does it, but there's a lot of good books about sculpture projects and things that you can try, whatever level you're at.
All around Bill's studio, you can see the bits and pieces of works that have been finished and works that are yet to be. Nearby, the basic tool of the sculptor, the clay, lies waiting, ready to take a new form, ready to be shaped by the mind and the inspiration of the artist. Most art doesn't stand up too well to the passing of time, but statues are different. Through the years, even centuries, the statues of Bill Hopen will continue to stand watch, always ready to deliver the message of the artist to anyone who's willing to take a moment and listen.